I want to talk about a concept today that includes speed. So, talking about how an athlete's speed development can carry over to a sport. And today, we can just talk about specifically soccer. Okay. So, I think a concept that's typically missed is a learning to develop top speed with your athletes. So, actually developing overall speed. And then number two, speed endurance. So, for example, if you had two soccer players and they were guarding each other the entire game, and one athlete had a top speed of 20 miles an hour, and another athlete had a top speed of 19 miles an hour. Initially, off in your head, you're going to just assume that 20 mile an hour athlete is always faster and is going to be the athlete that comes out on top. But that's not always the case because there's something called speed endurance, which is the athlete's ability to replicate top end speed repeatedly. Let's say you have a GPS unit on a soccer player and they are accumulating 50 sprints throughout the game. So the athlete that has a better speed endurance or capacity is going to be able to hit, let's say, 17 miles an hour consistently throughout the game, even at the end reps, okay? And let's say that 20 mile per hour athlete isn't developed in that regard, and now they're dropping off to 16, 15 miles an hour, and you see that the athlete that was slower in the very beginning or in overall one rep max speed test is actually faster towards the end of the game. And this can kind of explain some of the misconceptions people have, or if you see an athlete that you don't think's that fast, but for some reason they're really successful towards the end of the game. This is a common thing. And there's two regards to this, or two aspects I want to talk about. First is like developing speed. So a lot of times speed training is not only implemented in the gym, but it's also, or at whatever facility you're training at, but it's also being tried to be implemented. I said that really weird, but coaches are trying to implement it at their sports practice, right? And I think a lot of times the number one missing factor is they're not giving their athletes enough rest to actually replicate a highest intensity effort, because it seems uncomfortable to rest. Coaches don't maybe know what to do in between. They want the athletes to be tired, but that's not the goal. The goal is to provide the adaptation, and really the less tired you can make your athletes, the better. So number one is, if you're a sport coach doing sprints at practice, make the rest times really uncomfortably long. So let's say you do one rep of 30-yard sprint at max intensity. Ideally, you're timing this so you can follow this over time, but you're timing this, and then they get a 3 to 4 minute rest between each rep. So you might only get 3 or 4 reps done, and that's totally fine, because the adaptation you're going for is athletes being able to run 100% to build speed. Okay, so that's something that has to be understood. You can't just run a bunch of reps with limited rest. You're going to start training them at a much lower capacity, and they're not actually going to develop speed. Number two we're going to look into is speed endurance, right? So when you're doing these sprint reps, you're going to have a good idea of where your athletes are at based on how often are they able to replicate that top end speed, or where's the fall off at. So if that was the goal for the day, you could potentially set a rest period that was a little bit shorter, and then you would track the time of each sprint. And as an athlete started to fall off, let's say they started out at the 100% for the day, if they got down below 92 to 90% of that 100, that's when you call it. So you say, okay, we did great today. Let's move on. And then they go home, recover, recoup, and you can come back another day and work on it again. So the goal is that the athlete can complete over time more sprints, maintaining that high intensity reps. So they're able to continue to sprint at a high percentage of their max speed repeatedly. This is going to be what carries over to sport. When you, for example, take a soccer player and have a 2 mile conditioning test, or anything like that, 800 meter repeats, just anything asinine like that, that's not actually going to have a lot of carryover. Like you in a small regard are building aerobic capacity, sure, but that's going to be a very small piece of the pie, and that actually can just be developed through playing soccer. So I would just recommend that your slow, long conditioning, you just cut that out and just have them play soccer or drill more, and actually just get that conditioning in sport, because that's going to be a little bit more applicable to what they're actually doing. But that gives you an insight, because I've seen a lot of people try to do speed training where they say it's speed training and the rest periods are limited and there's a bunch of movements mixed in all together, when really there needs to be a lot of attention and detail onto reps, rest time, and what adaptation you're trying to drive. You can't just go out there and just sprint. In the beginning, that would potentially make progress, but as your athletes develop, that's going to be either neutral or not actually might push you in the wrong direction and cause some issues and soft tissue injuries and overtraining. So at the end of the season, they're not at their best. So if you guys have any questions on that, let me know. Just to recap, we have top end speed, we have speed, capacity, or endurance. Those are going to be two very important factors in a sport like soccer. And there are specific set out ways to drive that adaptation. And oftentimes I think people are missing that and not driving the correct adaptations and leaving a lot of performance on the table. So have a great day, guys. And